All right, so you know how we're all kind of fascinated by that like spark between people? When you feel that attraction, and it's not just like surface level, it's something deeper. We're going to take a deep dive today. We're looking at this podcast called Podcast Heart and Mind, a journey into the art of attraction. And don't worry, it's not about like cheesy pickup lines or anything like that. This is really about like the real deal.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about this podcast is right away they emphasize that attraction is individual. There's no like one size fits all.
Exactly. It's not a formula.
Yeah, and that's refreshing.
It really is. And it makes you think about like all the times maybe things haven't quite worked out. Maybe it's because we're trying to like force something that isn't really there.
Right, like trying to make someone fit into a mold that they're not meant for.
And I think that's what I liked about this podcast is it really talks about respecting each person's preferences and boundaries.
Yes. It's about starting from a place of trust and understanding. And, that whole idea of trust that is like the foundation of any strong connection. And this podcast really emphasizes that respecting individuality is a really powerful way to build that trust.
So important. It makes me think of this one time. I was trying to be, super flirty. I thought I was being really smooth.
We've all been there.
But I totally misread the situation. And I think I came across as way too pushy. Looking back, I'm like, oh gosh, that was so awkward.
It happens. But yeah, I think that's why this whole emphasis on communication that the podcast talks about is so crucial.
Oh, absolutely. They really hit on that. Communication is like everything.
It's the key, but it's not just talking, right?
Right. It's deeper than that.
It's like actually listening and understanding.
And this podcast, they talk about using I statements to be direct with your needs and desires.
Which can be hard.
It can be really hard. You're putting yourself out there.
It can feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
But I think that's where the real connection comes from, right?
Mm.
When you can actually be honest and open.
I think so. It's the start of it. And, it makes you think, like, how good are we at really listening? Not just waiting for our turn to talk, but actually, like, absorbing what the other person's saying.
That's a skill in itself, isn't it?
It really is. And this podcast suggests we pay attention to more than just the words.
Yeah, all those nonverbal cues. It's like our bodies have their own language.
That's so true.
Sometimes it's even louder than our words.
Think about it. It's like the subtle shifts in someone's body language, the way they lean in, eye contact, or even a light touch.
Yeah.
It can say so much.
Right. And it made me think about the flip side of that, too. Like, how are we coming across? Are we respecting someone's personal space?
Mm-hmm.
Is our energy matching theirs in a way that feels comfortable for both people?
It's like we're sending out signals all the time, whether we realize it or not.
We are.
Which makes me think about how the podcast talks about affection and physical touch.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not necessarily about these grand gestures.
It's the little things.
It's about those little things that create a space where someone feels safe and cared for.
Yes, absolutely. It's about respecting boundaries and making sure any physical touch is okay with both people. Like you were saying, it's all about being aware of the signals we're sending and receiving.
And again, it's that emotional intelligence we were talking about before, you know. Being tuned into all those subtle cues in ourselves and in others, it makes such a difference in building trust and connection.
It's so important. And I think this is where the podcast takes a really interesting turn. They start talking about how true intimacy goes way beyond just the physical.
It's about that deeper emotional connection.
Yeah, where you really feel seen. You feel understood.
And that comes from sharing experiences, being vulnerable, letting someone into those like deeper parts of yourself.
Right. And I love how they give that example of doing hobbies together. Like imagine taking a pottery class with someone you're interested in. You're both laughing at your messy creations, bonding over that shared experience.
Yeah.
You know?
And it doesn't have to be something big and fancy like that. It can be anything. Cooking a meal together, taking a walk, or even just watching a movie.
Right. It's those everyday moments.
It's really about the quality of time you spend together.
And being present in those moments. Putting our phones down, tuning out all the distractions, and just connecting with the person in front of us.
It's easier said than done.
It is.
But, we could all benefit from that, even if we're not specifically trying to, create romantic attraction.
Being present is a gift you can give to anyone in your life.
Absolutely.
And it strengthens those bonds and deepens those connections, sometimes in ways we don't even realize.
So we've talked about respecting individuality, clear communication, being present, emotional intelligence, and those little things like affection and touch. There's so much to this whole idea of attraction.
There is.
So where do we go from here?
Well, the podcast goes into some really interesting stuff next. They talk about confidence.
Oh, yeah. How that plays into attraction.
Exactly. And I think it's important to make that distinction that they make between confidence and arrogance,
Yeah.
you know?
Arrogance is a total turnoff.
Not attractive.
Not at all. So how do you find that sweet spot?
Yeah.
Being confident, but not cocky.
Well, we'll have to dive into that. But before we do, I want to circle back to compliments for a second, because they make this really good point about how a genuine compliment can be so powerful.
It can make someone's day,
It can.
but it has to be authentic.
It can't be some cheesy line.
No, it has to come from the heart.
Exactly. People can tell when it's not genuine.
They can, and then it has the opposite effect.
It does.
It's funny. I often hesitate to give compliments because I don't want to come across as corny or anything. But this podcast really made me think about that. Like, maybe we should step outside of our comfort zones a little more and just express those feelings of appreciation.
Yeah. Because think about how good it feels to receive a compliment that really means something to you.
It can totally brighten your day, make you feel seen. And it's such a simple act of kindness.
Right.
Which brings up another interesting point from the podcast. They talk about letting relationships develop naturally. Not forcing things,
Right.
not trying to rush it.
Just letting things unfold.
Yeah, and not putting on a facade.
Being yourself.
Right. And I think that goes back to respecting individuality, doesn't it? Letting things grow at their own pace.
It does. It really does.
It's like a good reminder that building something real takes time. You have to be patient, and you have to be willing to be vulnerable.
It's a process.
It really is. It's not about instant gratification. It's about those slow burning embers that eventually build into this warm, steady flame.
Yeah, it's like you wouldn't try and force a flower to bloom, right?
Yeah.
You have to nurture it patiently and let it blossom in its own time.
That's a perfect analogy. And it makes me think about what the podcast says about being present in those early stages. It's so easy to overthink everything and get stuck in your head,
Yeah.
but they really encourage us to just relax and be ourselves.
Just let things flow.
Exactly. And I think that's where confidence comes in.
Oh, definitely.
Not in a, cocky way,
No, not arrogance.
but just that self-assuredness, that
Yeah.
belief in yourself.
Knowing your worth.
Yes. So it's about finding that balance between knowing you're valuable, but also being humble and open to learning.
Being open to growth.
Yes. And that actually reminds me of something else they said about compliments.
Okay.
They said that a really good compliment focuses on something specific about the person you know. It's not generic or superficial. It's like you've really noticed something unique about them.
It shows you're paying attention.
Exactly. You see something special in them. And it's not just about physical appearance or anything like that.
It goes deeper.
It does. And it's funny. I think a lot of us hesitate to give compliments
I do sometimes.
because we don't want to sound cheesy or whatever. But this podcast really encourages us to just go for it.
Put it out there.
Yeah. Express those genuine feelings of appreciation.
And it feels so good to get a compliment like that, doesn't it? When you know it's really true.
It does. It really makes you feel seen.
Yeah. And it can boost your confidence too.
Absolutely.
It's like this little reminder that a little kindness can go a long way.
It really can.
And speaking of kindness, the podcast talks about this idea of creating a romantic atmosphere.
Oh, okay.
But before you go picturing rose petals and grand gestures, they actually emphasize those small, thoughtful things,
What kind of things? Give me some examples.
like lighting candles, maybe putting on some music that the other person likes,
Okay.
or even just like tidying up a bit before they come over.
This is just making an effort.
Right. It's about creating a space where you can both relax and connect and just feel comfortable being yourselves.
You're setting the stage.
Exactly. And another thing they talk about is anticipating needs,
Oh, interesting.
like paying attention to your partner's cues and doing something that shows you care.
So if you know they had a long day, maybe you offered to make dinner.
Yeah. Or give them a back rub.
It's those little acts of service.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can mean so much.
Yeah.
It shows you're not just thinking about yourself.
You're tuned into them.
You're tuned into their well-being.
I think that all comes back to emotional intelligence.
And 100%.
Being aware of our own emotions and the emotions of the people around us.
And this is something the podcast really dives into. They say emotional intelligence is so crucial for navigating relationships.
Makes sense.
It's about understanding our own triggers,
Yeah.
and recognizing other people's emotions and being able to communicate even when things get tough.
That's a lot.
It is.
It's interesting, because they use this word journey a lot when they're talking about attraction and relationships. It's not about reaching a destination.
It's about the process.
It is. The ups and downs and all that growth that comes with connecting with another human being.
And that journey, it requires vulnerability.
It does.
It requires us to step outside of our comfort zones and to be open to learning and growing both individually and together.
Okay, so we've covered so much in this deep dive. We've talked about individuality, communication, being present, emotional intelligence, those little acts of kindness, creating a romantic atmosphere, anticipating needs. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
So what stands out to you most from all of this?
I think for me, it's that focus on emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been interested in that, but this podcast really brought it to life in a way that resonated with me.
Me too. I feel like it's that underlying current that connects all the other pieces, you know? The more we understand ourselves and the people around us, the more fulfilling our connections can be.
Absolutely. And the best part is emotional intelligence is a skill that anyone can develop. It's not something you're born with, it's something you work on.
You learn and you grow.
Exactly.
So if you're feeling a little lost when it comes to attraction or relationships, remember, you have that power within you. You can develop those emotional intelligence muscles. It's a journey, but every step you take towards understanding yourself and others brings you closer to those connections you're looking for.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's a great takeaway for everyone listening, no matter where they are on their journey.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about. What are some ways you can bring more emotional intelligence into your own interactions? And it's not just about romantic relationships either, right? This whole idea of emotional intelligence can really help us in all our relationships.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the foundation for any kind of meaningful connection.
It's like that secret ingredient.
Yeah. It takes attraction from just a fleeting thing to something deeper and more lasting.
I like that. It's like turning those sparks into a real flame.
Exactly. And I think that's what we've really uncovered in this deep dive into podcast Heart and Mind. It's not about playing games or manipulating people.
It's about real connection.
Genuine connection.
It all comes down to being intentional and mindful.
And having that self-awareness.
So much of it comes back to that.
Yeah.
So as you're listening, think back to what really resonated with you.
What stood out?
Was it the idea of respecting individuality?
Or maybe it was the power of communication.
Or being present in those moments?
Yeah. Or maybe it was that reminder that intimacy goes beyond the physical. It's about those deeper connections that make us feel truly seen and understood.
This podcast really got me thinking about how I can bring more emotional intelligence into my own life.
Me too. And it's a journey.
It really is. It's always evolving.
It is. It's about self-discovery and growth and being vulnerable.
You know, this whole deep dive has made me realize that attraction isn't just about finding the right person.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's about becoming the right person.
What do you mean?
The kind of person who can build and nurture healthy relationships.
I love that. It's about cultivating those qualities within ourselves.
Exactly. Like empathy and self-awareness.
Or emotional intelligence.
All those things that make us magnetic.
That draw people to us.
So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. Don't be afraid to embrace the journey of connection. It might not always be easy.
There might be bumps along the way.
But it's in those moments of vulnerability that we really discover the beauty of human connection.
So keep exploring. Keep those hearts and minds open. You never know what amazing connections are waiting out there for you.
That's it for this deep dive into podcast Heart and Mind, a journey into the art of attraction. We'll see you next time.